Hello and welcome. This
Hi.
is Fearless Flight Live, and this week we have our crew edition with our lovely flight attendant Diane. Hi, Diane.
Hi.
And Captain Eric. Hey, Captain Eric, what's up?
Hi guys.
So we're actually um really prepared today.
We are.
Last week, if you haven't watched the show last week, at the very end, we got inevitably a question that is a really great question as it pertains to the holidays and winter operations. And so this week we are going to talk about winter operations, both from the perspective of crew, and Diane's gonna start us off here in a second, as well as from the perspective of pilots and aircraft maintenance. So I'm just gonna quickly share this. And so if you're new here, this is Fearless Flight Weekly Live, our weekly live show. And first thing we always do is we let you know that we have a poll question tonight, and I will put the link also in chat a little later. I'm gonna address that question in a second. And like I said, we're gonna talk about winter operations. So please, if you're watching and you have questions for us about anything to do with flying in winter, getting, well, maybe not getting to the airport in the winter, because that has to do with driving. Other than give yourself lots of time, I don't know that we can help with that. But any questions regarding winter operations, let us know and put it in a chat. And we also want to welcome our Birds of a Feather members. That's our Facebook group. And we have almost 1,500 members, which is pretty,
Wow.
that's pretty crazy. And I just love all the support that members are giving each other and the questions, and we're in there too, sometimes to answer questions as well. And tonight's poll question, yeah, that's one of those things. If you watched last week, you heard Captain Ron and our young guest who was flying the next day to Australia, I believe it was. And she's not alone, because 75% of all fearful flyers actually contact us with less than 30 days. And I would actually say 39, it's probably more like 45% of those have fewer than 7 days left. So that's not a lot of time. And I know avoidance sounds like a great strategy until you get right to the end. And I know that very well from my exams in college.
Yeah.
So our poll question is actually on a different page today, because we want to collect the answers and keep up with the data. So the 3 questions, it's just 3 questions, is do you have a flight coming up between now and, well, obviously the holidays coming up, but also Christmas and New Year's? What's your level of confidence to make that flight? From 1 is I don't even know if I'm gonna do it, to 10, I got this. And also we want to know if you're interested in more of the flights that we have happening, our Cleared for Takeoff 301 classes, either in Los Angeles or Phoenix. So you can let us know there. And before I hand it over, this is where we're going to talk about winter operations, passenger preparation. So that's your prep, airport preparation, crew prep. We talk about aircraft de-icing and winter hazards. So Diane, why don't you start us off with passenger preparation?
Passenger preparation. And you wouldn't think that, oh, I've flown before, in the summer, spring, princess, summer, fall, winter, spring. And so it can't be that much different, but it really is. And part of that is, as I like to say, you have to pack two things differently for winter than you do for the rest of the year. One is you need to pack, sounds simple, but a sweater, a blanket, or something like that, because the planes are cold. It gets cold depending on, it's not all Phoenix, and where you're going to Chicago or Minneapolis or Denver, the aircrafts are warm, but not always. And we don't have blankets on the planes. We haven't had those for a very long time. So in addition to those big, gigantic, bulky coats that you have that you will probably want to take off in the plane and try to stuff them in the overhead bin, you try to think about bringing something light, a shawl, a wrap, a jacket, to make yourself comfortable. And that includes your feet, because the floors of the aircraft can get kind of drafty. And so the winter is not the time to decide you've got a really, really cool pair of sandals because you're going to go somewhere eventually. It's just be comfortable, but be smart about it as far as those kinds of things. So think ahead of the length of the trip and how comfortable you want to be. And because we can't help you with regard to keeping warm. The planes, the pilots are going to try to keep the temperature comfortable, but that's not always possible. So think of what will make you comfortable. The second thing that I always say, particularly it's important in the winter, is to pack your patience. Everything is going to take longer in the winter for them almost across the board. Not only driving to the airport, as Dieter said, but once you get there, snow and sleet and ice, and those are just the good things. As far as the crew trying to get there, they're trying to drive to the airport too. But everything takes a little bit longer, right from getting catering trucks to the aircraft, and then certainly as Eric is going to talk about, the de-icing situation, and specifically from the passenger perspective, we're going to push back from the gate whenever we push back. And if we have to de-ice, we're going to go to a location where the de-icing fluid is going to be sprayed on the plane. And that's going to take time. And it's going to take more time if we're second or third or fifth in line behind other aircraft to get it's like going to the bank. You're in line and your turn comes up eventually. And then so your turn finally happens, you get de-iced, you taxi out, and all those planes that were in front of you might be in front of you on the taxiway. And so it can happen, and Eric will address this better than I can, that when you get out there in the taxiway, if you have to sit for a little too long, then you may have to, okay, I'm so sorry, but you have to de-ice again, which means you turn around and you go back to the area where the aircraft are de-iced. All of that, as you are listening, is going to take time.
Actually, there's a question right here that I can. So how long is that gonna be? Like in general, like how much more time are we talking? That's literally the question. How much more time are we talking?
It could be this long, and it could well.
And really, the best answer to that is it depends mostly on your position in the line, and if you're first, you can get right through in 15-20 minutes. If you're just doing one stage of de-icing, 15 or 20, if you have to do a two-step process,
you're going to talk about
that's going to take longer, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit when we do that. And there's no way to know until the day you get there what the weather situation is.
Right. And that's just it. I mean, not only as Eric was saying, the number of planes, how long it takes, but it could be yucky, but not terribly yucky. And by the time you finish de-icing, get on the taxiway, and then all of a sudden it starts sleeting again. I mean, talk about not having control. And we know that a lot of our fearful flyers, that is a real concern for them, is their lack of control. And trust us, the one thing we don't have control over as crew is Mother Nature. And so the guys and gals who are up there on the flight deck are always doing the best and the most efficient as is possible, considering the conditions. So to answer that question, it could be, like I said, from now until forever. The bottom line there is that once we push back from the gate, the flight attendants, short of whatever safety activities they have to participate in, once they're done with that, we have to be seated in our jump seats and harnessed up. That's an FAA requirement, so that if it's a safety issue, we can get out of our seats. But if you forgot to take a pill and you need a glass of water, we cannot get up out of our jump seats. We simply cannot do that. Even if we're sitting being de-iced, we cannot get out of our jump seats to do that. And so please understand that when you are sitting there, and if it's a half an hour long, 45 minutes, if you maybe get de-iced twice, we cannot get up and get you a soda or this, that, or those kinds of things. So you really do need to understand the requirements that the FAA has on the crew members, the flight attendants, as far as being able to get up and move about the cabin. So again, pack your patience and the understanding that everybody is doing the best they can, but winter is winter. So yeah.
I can actually answer the next question here. It's a great question too. So then, can we get compensated if there are delays for de-icing? And I remember this from having talked about it last year. The only time, and the FAA, I think, has even regulations or rules around that. The only time that there is the possibility of compensation is if the airlines who are responsible for having enough de-icing fluid, if they haven't anticipated that, then there is a possibility. But I remember from a conversation last year or 2 years ago that this is exceedingly difficult to prove in reality. But that would be the only way, and I'm gonna say good luck to you, whoever asked that question, because I remember, even last time that yeah, it's probably not gonna get compensated.
Probably not going to happen, because the contract of carriage, as far as compensation for all different kinds of things, the big exception is act of nature, and that covers.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I just remember having looked that up last year or 2 years ago, and there is actually something in there that the airlines are responsible for having enough de-icing fluid on hand. But you know what, if you get storms like around Christmas last year, there's no way, I'm sure. Okay, so that's passenger prep, and we already went a little bit into the de-icing, but what's next, Captain Eric? What about the crew?
Well, guys, I didn't want to lecture you nonstop, and Dieter will interrupt me if we have questions, but I want to give you some quick bullet points on winter operations and hope that helps you out. So the first thing we group really that we think about with winter operations is the airport itself. The airport trains their people, the operations people, for what they're going to do during winter, particularly for snow removal, that sort of thing. They have to have the equipment, and they have to figure out where they're going to put the snow. They can't build igloos on the taxiways for ramp people to stay warm in, and they can't pile it up at the end of the runways because the airplanes have to clear it. That messes with their performance calculations. Also, they have to leave the berms by the edges of the runway fairly short so that an airplane doesn't turn and stick a wing in the snowbank. So it actually takes some thinking about the snow removal, where you're going to put it, and also to be environmentally correct, where they're going to perform de-icing operations and where they're going to catch the fluid and that sort of thing is also consideration. The second aspect I want to talk about was crews, and that's kind of short. We every recurrent training cycle we go through, when we're coming up on winter, we have a detailed package on our company's regulations and the FAA regulations concerning winter operations training, special considerations for us, particularly de-icing the aircraft. And we have a special checklist for each different kind of aircraft that we go through to set up the airplane prior to de-icing, and then things we do after de-icing before we can taxi again. And each airplane for the manufacturer has a slightly different set of procedures for how we prepare to start and finish de-icing. And the last thing I'll hit, because it is a little more involved, is aircraft de-icing itself. And if you guys get bored with it, send in a chat or something, I'll just stop. But we cannot take off with anything sticking to the airplane. That's a hard and fast rule. And as many of these rules are formed after the 60s and the 70s, having the pilots go out there and say, "Oh, it looks pretty good," is not good enough. That caused some accidents. And so now there's a specific set of regulations and procedures for airplane de-icing that I'll talk about right now. And as I like to mention, my favorite fictional airport, East Overshoe, Wisconsin, where they de-ice every single day. So they're really good at it and they know what they're doing. There's two stages of de-icing. And if you are unlucky enough to have to de-ice, hopefully there will only be the first stage where we use type 1 fluid. That is used to strip the airplane of any contaminants sticking to it, any ice, anything like that. And if it's not precipitating out, so the more is falling on top of the airplane while you're cleaning it off, that's quite sufficient. Real quickly, that's performed with a 90% glycol solution, and it can be diluted. It has very short, what we call holdover times, ability to absorb more precipitation falling into it. It's not thickened. It's orange in color. So you know that it is, in fact, type 1 fluid. That colorant is added, and it's sprayed on between 130 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a memory of both the airport and facilities and the companies may have different procedures. And I have a memory of a long time ago when I had hair like Dieter and Diane. We were in an airport, and I was trying to come up with it tonight, I'm almost sure it was somewhere in Florida that normally does not need de-icing. And this was decades ago. And the de-icing procedure we saw being conducted when we came out in the morning to get the airplane, it had frozen and it was humid. And there was frost and stuff stuck all over the airplane. So the de-icing procedure was being performed before we got there. And that consisted of the ramp people hooking the airplane up to their tug and tractoring it out on the ramp where the sun was hitting the whole airplane, pointing the nose at the sun, and everybody standing around and waiting for it all to melt and fall off the airplane. And that was the airport de-icing procedure, which wasn't that absurd at the time for Florida. It's kind of like wasting all your money on surfboards if you live in Anchorage. For them to have a whole lot of money spent on de-icing equipment and procedures was pointless. Mm-hmm. But I specifically remember that from decades ago. Now, if you're in East Overshoe, things may not work out so well with just cleaning the airplane off. That would be an example if you came out and it was caked with ice and you stripped everything off, but it was a nice, pretty day and nothing was falling on it. That's all good. Then you can taxi out and go. If it's snowing or various other types of precipitation falling, unfortunately, now you're going to clean the aircraft off and more stuff is going to fall on top of it. So we do what's called a two-step procedure. The first one was a type 1 fluid, and the second one is with type 4 fluid in North America, type 2 in Europe. And the difference is the second fluid, first you strip the aircraft off so it's beautiful and shiny and looks like it just came out of the car wash. And then you put a layer of fluid on it that is protective in nature. It's thickened and it absorbs the moisture into the fluid. And the smart old chemical engineers have designed it such that it sits on the wing, and as the airplane hits 80 or 90 miles an hour, screaming down the runway with all this stuff on the wing, it shears off and drops off, and the wing is clean, and the airplane flies away. It's because of the way the crystal lattice structure is designed. That's in the fluid, and it's really kind of fascinating. I haven't had to do that too many times, but I've done it a few times.
That's green.
It's green, or
blue.
sometimes it's brick red in color as opposed to orange. And I was checking something for reference today, and this large operator said, "Don't forget your Christmas colors, everybody." And they were listing the colors of de-icing fluid. And they said, "We color it like that so that everybody will be in a cheery holiday mood." That's not why they color it. They color it like that because as it absorbs more and more moisture, it becomes more dull in appearance. And the pilots can tell by looking at it that it is losing effectiveness if it changes much color. But we have charts for the rate and type of precipitation and how long we're good to keep that de-icing fluid on and go out and take off. And that's called a holdover time. And if we exceed a holdover time, we have to go out and start the whole process over again. Back you go to the ramp, hit the type 1 fluid, strip it all off, and then hit the type 4 and reprotect the aircraft and go back out and do that, which
and this is when you need to have your patience.
that does not make anybody happy.
It doesn't make us happy either.
Nobody is happy if that happens. Yeah. But it's the type 4 fluid is thickened, it's propylene glycol, it's green or brick red in color. And as I mentioned, as the color changes, you can tell that it loses effectiveness. And that's the two basic types of fluid. And I hope that wasn't too much stuff that I was just unrolling there. But those are the basic outlines of winter operations.
And sometimes the de-icing we were talking about, I had one incident that it was it was cold, but it was very, very humid. And so it didn't seem like there was going to be any ice forming. But with the humidity and heading up to 30,000 feet, there was a concern about whether or not there was going to be ice forming on the wings. So anyway.
So at that point, that's a great question. And that question, I remember nobody asked it today. But so if we have to de-ice while we're on the ground, how come we don't have to de-ice at like 40,000 feet where it's minus 60 Celsius? So
that's a fabulous question.
Really good question. Yeah.
Fabulous question. On the ground, the airplane needs to be taken care of by the de-icing procedures we talked about. Once it's in the air and moving rapidly forward, it has de-icing equipment on board the airplane, heated leading edges of the wings, and heated cowl lips around the edges of the engine, and heated instrumentation. And when that stuff is turned on, the only place ice forms is on the very leading edges of stuff as the airplane passes through it. So by de-icing the airplane en route, when it's in motion, the airplane can take care of itself. And as you mentioned, if you get up high, once we're below, I think it was minus 40 Celsius, which happens to be minus 40 Fahrenheit, static air temperature, the air can hold so little water, it's not of concern. It's more of a concern right around the freezing point. And we can talk about aerodynamics a different day, but in general, the temperature the airplane feels gets raised as it moves through the air because it compresses the air hitting it. So until it becomes a little below the freezing point, stuff cannot freeze to the airplane because of skin temperature from the air compression. Well, once it's in the air, everything's fine. And in fact, an interesting story, on the 737, as I mentioned, the cowl lips are de-iced, the leading edge of the wing, and the first models they thought, well, we need to protect the tail. We need to plumb that so that we can de-ice it back there. So it was hooked up that way. And then they sent the poor test pilots out, and they got behind this monster airplane that was then just sending a fire hose of water at them in slightly below freezing temperatures to see where the ice was going to cake and how effective the de-icing was working. When it got down, the engineers go, well, look at that. There's no ice on the tail. Well, why is that? Well, nobody knew exactly for sure, but if there was no ice on the tail when they were shooting this fire hose at them, it became unnecessary to have that plumb for de-icing, because the ice just does not stick to the leading edge of the horizontal and vertical stabilizer. That kind of test flying is when it's more fun to go to the bar and tell the girls you are a test pilot than actually be one. That would not be a fun operation.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Somebody had to do it.
Somebody had to do it.
And I'm sure the engineers figured out why exactly it is that the tail don't.
I'm sure they did too, and I don't know, but they were surprised enough that they designed the original airplane plumbed with that equipment back there, and it became unnecessary to use.
Cool. I just want to quickly share this. That is such a crazy image. Like, there's really specialized equipment out there, and I know, I'm flying from Toronto and even Buffalo in the winter time, and especially Buffalo knows a thing or two about snow and extremely cold temperatures. So they are, it just, honestly, yes, you're gonna be delayed. Yes, it's gonna, definitely test your preparation. However, from simply an engineering point of view and from a, team work point of view, that kind of effort to keep the runways clear, to keep the planes de-iced and everything moving, it's just fascinating. So maybe you want to, pay attention to these things. One, it passes your time, and two, you might actually find a lot of appreciation of the people that keep you safe every day when you fly. So
and for us sitting on the plane and watching, so much of the for me personally, to watch the rampers, it's bad enough in the summer in Phoenix when you see these men and women and they're working the ramp, throwing bags, whatever, and it's 120 or 122 on the tarmac. And it's the same thing reverse in winter. You have those rampers, the men and the women, and they're throwing bags and doing everything else, and it's sleeting and it's snowing and it's freezing rain, and they're out there throwing bags and hooking up the tugs to the aircraft, and they're out there in the most horrendous weather conditions, and they're still doing it to make sure that you get to where you're going. So again, it's a lot of patience and understanding and appreciation for all of the people. It's not just the crew, it's all the airport ops folks. And
Thanksgiving is coming up.
Yeah, that's true.
I want to do a quick shout out to Anita. Anita says hi from New Zealand, which is pretty cool. And she said it was good to hear this, as she'll be heading over in December and flying to Chicago. Now, there's also a place that's pretty chilly, pretty windy.
Yeah, windy.
Yeah, definitely. And like Toronto and Buffalo, being around the Great Lakes, it's really like this bone chilling kind of moist cold. That definitely isn't always a lot of fun. But she says thank you for that. And I actually have something else for you, Anita. Capt Ron and I are working on this upcoming monthly group coaching webinar, which will be this actually my birthday. I should remember that, December 21st. We will have that webinar, and it'll all be about winter operations and long flights. So I don't know. I think he might even get a blog post together before that, at the beginning of December. Fingers crossed. But stay tuned. We'll post on Facebook. Hopefully that'll work for you. So, and one other question that I had saved over here.
Dieter, I remember three of them that had yes, no, or three answers, and I feel guilty in passing them over. Somebody asked if flying was more dangerous in the winter.
Yes. So I was just gonna look them up. Perfect. So
and the answer to that is absolutely not. There's just differing considerations of the weather. Then somebody else asked, how does the airplane perform in the cold air? And the answer to that is much, much better. That air density gives the wings a lot more lift and allows the engines, whether it's a propeller airplane or a jet engine, to produce much more power. To the point where the pilots really notice it. You really notice the difference between a winter operation and a hot summer operation in terms of the performance. Those were two that I remember somebody asking about.
Yep.
With the quickie answers.
Yeah, and Anita. Okay, so Anita's flying December 8th. So, and the other thing I can suggest to you, if you haven't done so, Anita, and I'll put the link in at the end of the show, is get a free 15-minute coaching call with Capt Ron. You know, talk about the things that that are your triggers. That's what we call those things here. So flying over water or long flights or winter, you know, those are triggers that trigger our flight anxiety, our fear of flying. And as such, while, you know, we can give some kind of information like we did today and help demystifying what's going on at the airport in the winter and what's going on with the aircraft. Ultimately, as you hopefully know already, fear of flying is, in that sense, a phobia. It's irrational in the sense that there is absolutely no relationship to how you feel when you think about flying and getting on an airplane and the actual safety track record of any tier 1 airline. And I would add New Zealand to North America, to Europe. Even China is part of that, and Australia as well. So all of those are tier 1 airlines, and the likelihood of you or me dying in one of those airlines is 1 in 33.2 million years. And that's a very smart person, Arnold Barnett, that we had on here before, who is a statistician and a professor at the MIT, and who actually was afraid to fly. So from that sense, it's really important to recognize that what's going on inside is really to do with what triggers that anxiety more so than what's happening outside, whether it's the weather, whether it's, you know, the airplane, whatever it may be. So, but thank you so much, Eric, and Diane, for this super detailed winter ops. I do have that one question. So what happens if at the airport if the power goes on?
The operational side that we're flying, the part that controls the lights, the approach stuff, and the control towers and that kind of stuff, they have power backup after power backup after power backup. And even if they got pulled down, we have air route traffic control centers in the country and approach facilities giving us headings and controlling the airplanes. So they got very close to the airport. And the airplanes could take care of landings with GPS approaches and that sort of thing, even without those facilities being powered up. Generally, that kind of thing only applies to what's going on inside, and as pilots, we don't really concern ourselves with what's going on inside, unless the concessions lose power and we want to get something to eat.
I was just gonna say, if the Starbucks goes dark.
If Starbucks loses power, then that's
Everybody's in
a
trouble.
major
Then it's-
problem. Major
With the
problem.
flight attendant, it's
Then
huge.
nobody happy then.
And it's not like a Bruce Willis movie, you know. It's not like, oh my God, we're gonna have to go out there with candles and make sure that the airplanes, the pilots can see the runway. It's
So
not.
even if there are parts of the airport, maybe in emergency lighting, all the flight operation kind of areas have their backup generators and
That's
so
Not something I ever even heard of
right.
in 32 years.
No.
well, I think I mentioned to you the question was from a lady in the UK, and I think in Heathrow, the lights did go out for a while, and so I think that's where that question came from.
As we're talking about this, a memory just flashed through my mind, talking about how cold it is and passenger preparation, that sort of thing. Just because you're in Arizona or in some of the southwestern states doesn't mean that flying in the winter is going to be okay. I had one flight and we had an overnight in Flagstaff, and Flagstaff in the winter, their ski areas up in Flagstaff. And we had a very, very early morning departure, and Flagstaff does not have jet bridges. So there are ramps so that the passengers leave the terminal and walk across the tarmac and up the ramps, that sort of thing. And so it's cold. And that morning I was working forward, and so my little plane, it was 6 degrees outside. This Flagstaff is Arizona. It was 6 degrees outside. So basically in the galley, when everybody boarded, it was about 6 degrees in there. So when say, maybe 10, I'm going to give it a few extra degrees. And the back of the aircraft was probably up to about 25 or 30, but it's cold, you know, irrespective of pretty much where you start, it can be cold everywhere. So part of your preparation is check the weather of where you're leaving, where you're landing, that sort of thing. And part of it that we were joking before about getting to the airport, holiday travel, there are more people traveling. And so the lines are going to be longer. Lines to check bags, lines to get through TSA, all those kinds of things are going to be longer. So it is smart to try to get to the airport a little bit earlier than you normally would have, just so it doesn't create anxiety in you and become a trigger that you're concerned whether or not you're going to get to your plane on time. So that's a little extra.
Or it stays within a 5 to 7 range rather than hitting a 8 or a 9. So
watch you up at 8, 9, or 10 or so. So yeah.
Dieter, I had one last 30-second one that was a question posed. Somebody asked, when does it get too cold to fly? Well, my personal minimum is a lot higher than the airplane's personal minimum, but in general, the airplane's personal minimum is -43 to -45 Celsius. So we're talking about -46 to -49 Fahrenheit. That's without the wind chill. And the airplane doesn't feel the wind chill. So if you somehow got to the airport without dying, good for you. That's quite impressive. And the reason that low limit exists for almost all different types of jet planes is because that's at or near the freezing point of jet fuel. And it really doesn't burn well if it's frozen into ice crystals or a block. But once the engine's running, then it exchanges heat. It exchanges heat with the fuel oil heat exchanger. It can warm itself up just fine, but it can't be sitting there static below those temperatures for very long.
And that's why when we were in Antarctica, they have fuel depots with these thick blankets where all the fuel is wrapped in these. It's a crazy operation. It's just that was I mean, apart from digging out the fuel depot, which gets you warmed up, it was quite the operation down there to get into these old DC-3 airplanes. And the other reason is a lot of the technology the wires and all that, if it gets to that kind of sustained cold air, these things start to become considerations too.
Right.
So yeah,
These are pretty extreme limitations that in general people would never see or encounter flying.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, you guys. I really appreciate you coming on today. And so just as an aside, like the crew edition is gonna be on every third Tuesday of the month. So every third Tuesday, and there are three of us will take any of your questions and have different topics that we'll address. And so if you have any questions, just send them our way, Capt Ron at FearlessFlight.com, or just message us, and we'll get those questions prepared just like today. And well, the only thing left for me to say is to all of you in the US, happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, you guys. Thanks for watching.
Yep. Thanks for watching.